Welcome, fans of the Justice League universe. My name is Sam.
My name is Alessandro.
So Alessandro is going to share his thoughts, having watched Excalibur recently and thought about it with respect to BVS. Bear in mind that these are not just coincidences. Chris Terrio majored in British literature, and Zack Snyder explicitly mentioned Excalibur as one of the films that he drew on in his direction of BVS. That was also in the Mark Hughes article in Forbes' 2014 article.
It is no coincidence that Zack Snyder chose to highlight the film Excalibur in the theater marquee at the commencement of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The two films share a fair amount of themes, situations, and parallels. Though it's not a retelling of the story, Batman v Superman borrows heavily from Excalibur to tell its own thought-provoking opera. The opening scene of the film Excalibur is one of fiery death and destruction, introducing us to Uther Pendragon, father to King Arthur, the knight who ultimately draws and wields Excalibur and pursues a useless quest for the Holy Grail. Indeed, the beginning of Batman v Superman is similarly dire, as we are introduced to Thomas and Martha Wayne, parents to Bruce, the Dark Knight who ultimately creates and wields the kryptonite spear in a useless quest of his own. As part of the opening to Batman v Superman, we also see the fiery death and destruction in Metropolis due to Superman's battle with General Zod. Following these scenes of murder and mayhem is our first look at kryptonite, found at the bottom of the Indian Ocean near the wreckage of the World Engine. It is carried by children, a symbol of innocence, from beneath the water surface to a surrogate of Lex's who has come in search of the kryptonite, with the intention of supplying it to the Dark Knight for the benefit of humanity, because in Lex's mind, humanity is better off without Superman. Excalibur sees the rise of the mighty sword Excalibur with its green glow reminiscent of kryptonite from beneath the water surface by the hand of the benevolent Lady of the Lake. It is sought after by Merlin with the ultimate intention of supplying it to the knight and future King Arthur for the benefit of man. Lex and Merlin are counterparts to each other in these two movies. Morgan Le Fay, by extension, also represents a counterpart to Lex, given the Merlin's teachings are passed on to her, and she replaces Merlin as the magical medium in the movie in the final third. We can identify the correlation between Lex and Merlin by considering their motivations and worldviews. Merlin, a man who manipulates and orchestrates things to his own end for what he believes is for the greater good, originally draws Excalibur from the lake and gives it to Uther and ultimately used by Arthur. Lex, a man who manipulates and orchestrates things to his own end for what he believes is the greater good, originally finds the kryptonite from the ocean and gives it to Batman and ultimately used by Superman. Merlin is motivated to eliminate evil from the world of man and bring a time of peace and prosperity, using King Arthur as his conduit, although he recognizes that there is no good without evil.
Good and evil, there never is one without the other.
Where hides evil, then, in my kingdom?
Always where you never expect it. Always.
His comment to Arthur that evil is found in the unlikeliest of places rings true to the blind side that both Arthur and Batman experience. Lex is motivated to eliminate the unnatural threat to humanity that is Superman and the metahumans. He wants people to understand their wickedness and purge the world of them. Just as Merlin has mistakenly thought that Arthur's father, Uther, would be the one to bring upon peace and prosperity, Lex too mistakenly thinks that Batman will be the conduit to deliver his redemption to the world. Just as Merlin recognizes the balance of power, so does Lex, although his balance comes in taking the place of Superman and the metahumans as humanity's savior and god.
And now God bends to my will.
Using her magics, Morgan attempts to steal Arthur's throne, which she believes was unlawfully taken and given to him as a result of supernatural means.
I have conceived a son, my king. My brother.
The means by which she attempts to take back the throne are abominable, using her magical prowess and her own DNA, as well as that of her enemy, to create Mordred in order to destroy Arthur and take his place as the people's ruler. Lex's own means of eliminating and replacing Superman include the act of playing God to replace a god by using his scientific prowess and his own DNA, as well as that of his enemy, to create the abomination Doomsday, in order to destroy Superman and take his place as the people's savior, after he was able to put Superman's morality into question. Lex too felt Superman was unjustly praised and viewed as a god and savior, for in Lex's eyes, Superman was anything but those things. Lex and Merlin's perspective and perception of God also share similarities in the two movies. Lex's questioning of God harkens back to Merlin's advice to Arthur that
the gods of once are gone, forever. It's a time for men.
We can consider its correlation to the old gods of First World, the Greek gods of Wonder Woman and Aquaman, and the Earth gods of various religions. We can then think about how Superman and the metahumans are viewed as godly beings among us, and how they are replacing the gods that existed before as the world's saviors and devastators. Lex, for one, believes in humanity, and does feel that it is a time for men. This is inherent in his motivation to destroy Superman and the metahumans. There are signs of Lex's belief in man throughout the movie, including his faith in Batman as a man, and the attempts at rallying humanity against the metahumans.
God versus man.
And more notably is Lex's warning to Batman about the coming of Darkseid.
It's not me I'm wrong! He's hungry. He's found us. And he's coming!
Which harkens back to Merlin's warning that
the days of our kind are numbered. The one god comes to drive out the many gods.
It's inescapable to see a connection to Darkseid conquering Earth and driving out the metahumans. Superman is perceived as pure and good, so it would be natural to then associate him with King Arthur. And although he does have a role in relation to Arthur within the context of this movie, there is a greater parallel between Arthur and Batman. Both orphans, they each assume the moniker of knight and wield a mystical weapon with a greenish glow. They are both manipulated by someone pursuing their own interests, and they both pursue useless quests that unravel them, to rid the world of a threat that has yet to manifest itself. Arthur intends to do this by finding the Holy Grail.
We must find what was lost. The Grail.
And Batman intends to do this by killing Superman.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
Batman's insertion of the kryptonite spear into the floor of Wayne Station, and eventually drawing of the spear to use against Superman, parallels Arthur's own attempt at drawing Excalibur from the stone, which requires him to reinsert it and redraw it from the stone again. Given that Batman's role leading up to his confrontation with Superman seems to correlate with King Arthur, we can then conclude that Superman's role would be that of Sir Lancelot. Lancelot is supposed to be this pure and good knight sent by the Lady of the Lake to aid Arthur. Lancelot's love for Guinevere is Superman's love for Lois.
You're teasing me.
I will love you always. I will love you as my queen and as the wife of my best friend. And while you live, I will love no other.
Since Lois is Superman's connection to mankind, she is a representation of humanity.
You are my world.
Just as Arthur sees Lancelot as a source of betrayal and of harm to his kingdom, Batman sees Superman's potential betrayal and source of harm to the world. Once they are discovered, we see Lancelot leave Guinevere as he questions himself and his purpose. Similarly, Superman leaves Lois to go to the Arctic, where he too questions himself and his purpose. When Batman and Superman finally do battle, Superman insists,
If I wanted it, you'd be dead already.
and that Batman should stand down. This is the same attitude Lancelot takes to Arthur.
Yield, sir. I have the advantage.
Excalibur, I call on your power.
But like Arthur, Batman continues his rampage on Superman until finally he gains the upper hand by using the kryptonite. and the spear. Batman cuts Superman's indestructible skin, and we see him bleed for the first time. And just as Merlin says to Arthur,
"You have broken what could not be broken."
Hope is broken.
My pride broke it. My rage broke it.
with the help of Lois, Batman 2 is able to see the error in his ways.
It's his mother's name. It's his mother's name.
And tosses the spear aside. And the spear too finds its way to water, though by the hands of Lois. At the end of Excalibur, Arthur instructs Percival to find a pool of calm water and throw the sword into it. From water it came, to water it returned, just like the kryptonite spear. However, this is not the only scene in Excalibur with connections to the climax of Batman and Superman's battle. Arthur finds Lancelot and Guinevere lying naked in the forest together. He is about to impale Lancelot, but seeing him there helpless, and reminded of his love for Guinevere as she lay beside him, Arthur stops himself from killing him for the good of Guinevere and his own soul. Batman, as he held the spear above Superman, saw him helpless and stripped of all his armor, now a mere mortal. And there beside him was Lois, the representation of humanity. Batman finally sees that Superman is not a threat, but a hero, and for the good of humanity and his own soul, refrains from killing him. The culmination of this battle marks the conclusion of Batman's role as Arthur and Superman's role as Lancelot within the movie Batman v Superman. At this point, there is a role reversal between the two. As Lancelot says to Arthur,
"It is the old wound, my king. It has never healed."
Batman has never healed from the emotional wounds of his parents' deaths. Lancelot had faced an inner struggle within himself. He fought the armor that he wears inside his dream, which caused him to stab himself while he slept. Batman too struggled with himself, facing the armor he wears, the Bat identity, inside his dreams. But just as Lancelot's stab wound acted as a reminder and spurred him to seek out redemption, Batman's old emotional wounds from his parents' murder acted as a reminder to him and spurred him too to seek out redemption. He vows to help Superman just as Lancelot vowed to serve Arthur.
I make you a promise. Martha won't die tonight.
Now that Batman and Superman's rivalry has been quashed, we see the rising threat of Lex Luthor take form. Similarly, with the conflict of Arthur and Lancelot out of the way, comes the rising threat of Mordred. Morgan tells Mordred,
"No weapon forged by man will harm you whilst you wear this armor."
By the same token, no human weapons can harm Doomsday.
Every time we hit it, we make it more powerful. We can't attack.
What are you saying, Calvin?
I'm saying it's unkillable.
Only Excalibur is able to finally be used to kill Mordred, just as only the kryptonite spear is able to finally be used to kill Doomsday. So we see a new need for the kryptonite spear. And just as the Lady of the Lake promptly returned Excalibur to Arthur after he threw it into the water following his confrontation with Lancelot, Lois promptly goes to retrieve the spear from the water after having just thrown it in. In the film Excalibur, it is Guinevere who reunites Arthur with Excalibur just before his final confrontation with Mordred, so it's only appropriate that it is Lois that reunites Superman with the kryptonite spear just before his final confrontation with Doomsday. Before Arthur and Mordred's showdown, we see Morgan Le Fay killed by her own creation, Mordred. He sees her in her true form, not the majestic being that she thought herself to be. With the birth of Doomsday, Lex sees his creation fully realized. Just as Morgan is unable to control Mordred, who disobeys and kills her, Lex finds himself unable to control Doomsday, who, seeing Lex as a weak little creature before him, unleashes a punch that would likely have killed him. Though Superman's good nature, he saves the villain vowed to destroy him. As the threat of Doomsday elevates, there is a rising need for reinforcements, and with it enters Wonder Woman's role. Just as Percival takes on the quest for the Holy Grail on his own, so does Wonder Woman embark on her own quest to recover her photograph. Similarly, the two abandon their quests after seemingly coming so close to their goal. Upon abandoning his quest, Percival attempts to save Lancelot. We discover later that he was successful when Lancelot appears in battle against Mordred. And as Percival was successful, Wonder Woman also successfully saves Batman from Doomsday's heat vision blast, who then aids in the battle against the monster. Both Wonder Woman and Percival seek to provide aid to the protagonist following the apparent failure of their quests, although with the help of Batman, Wonder Woman is able to resolve her mission. Percival aims to help Arthur and does so, resulting in Arthur embracing his kingship and vowing to protect his kingdom from Mordred. Superman looks up and sees Wonder Woman and Batman fighting this impossible monster, and he too is inspired to embrace his humanity and protect his world. In their final confrontation, Mordred impales Arthur with his spear. Arthur pulls himself further into the spear to get closer to Mordred so he can stab him with Excalibur and kill him. In the same manner, Doomsday impales Superman with one of his spikes, and Superman pulls himself further in to plunge the kryptonite spear through Doomsday. In the end, Superman dies, and Batman realizes the extent of Superman's goodness. His words echo the sentiments that Lancelot says to Arthur after he apologizes to him.
My salvation is to die a knight of the Round Table.
You are that, and much more. You are its greatest knight. You are what is best in men.
You are what is best in men. Because, as Bruce says,
men are still good.
Excalibur is a masterpiece in its own right. Arthurian legend remains a timeless story. Zack Snyder does an impeccable job at adapting its motifs into the masterwork that is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. There is still more to find and more to perceive, because just like any good art, it can be dissected and interpreted with always new things to find.
And on behalf of the JLU podcast team, thank you for listening. If you'd like more in-depth content related to DC films, then be sure to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/JLUpodcast. If we get just a couple more patrons, then we are probably going to start up a full Man of Steel analysis. So if you're a fan of Man of Steel, then even just $1 a month can make that happen. That's at patreon.com/JLUpodcast.